Hello everyone. Good to welcome you back for panel 2 on the third day of UK market missions. For this next session, we're taking a look at UK fintech regulation, how it works obviously for yourselves and how you need to comply. And of course, questions that I'm sure you all have about your own businesses. So once again, definitely meet the speakers. I was in a session after the last panel and there was some fantastic interaction, and once again having this one-on-one stuff is really quite helpful because just one answer to one question could change your business. So do get involved, and of course use the chat function Q&A during the panel because they're all there to be answered. And a final reminder, tomorrow starting at 8 o'clock we have about setting up a UK presence around. We have a lawyer, we have an accountant, we have HR, we have a recruiter, stuff you need to know. Once again, it should be a lot of interesting insights. So onto this panel. To moderate, we have Olivia Minnick of Fintech Alliance, a close partner of ours and great organization, someone that you should definitely get to know and join. And joining on the panel is Nick Lee, Head of Regulatory Affairs at OakNorth. Got Jeff Dadswell, TH Risk Solutions, and Diana Paredes, CEO and co-founder of Suede Labs. So over to you, Olivia, and have a good session.
Thanks, Peter, and I hope everyone is enjoying the week so far. I'm sure you've already taken in a lot of information, but I think this panel will be really useful for you as well. I think in any new market that you come into, regulation will be a challenge, especially for kind of a fintech startup or scale up. You have a combination of, entering one of the most highly regulated industries, but also perhaps as a small and agile team, it can feel a little bit daunting to get your head around. But the UK does have a really supportive environment when it comes to fintech. Government and regulators are keen to make fintech work despite the challenges of kind of fast tech adoption and all of that. So really lucky to be joined today by Diana, Nick and Jeff, and I hope to open up some of that puzzle for you around regulation, find out what's out there to support fintechs coming in, and any advice that the panel have on making life easier and perhaps even the opportunities that environment has to offer. So first I could just ask the panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Jeff, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Dadswell. I'm the CEO of TH Risk Solutions. We help customers predominantly with navigating their way through the regulated world within the UK and elsewhere, focusing on fintech and startup businesses. Has been alluded to at the beginning there, it can be a bit of a tricky place to go through. So we provide support, everything from the business planning process at the start, right through to the regulatory process and hopefully achieving approval at the end.
That's perfect. And Nick?
Hi everyone, I'm Nick Lee. I'm Head of Regulatory Affairs at OakNorth. At OakNorth, we are in the UK a specialist bank that lends to SMEs. We use our next generation technology to make better credit decisions to the missing middle of SMEs. And we sell that technology to client banks around the world. Prior to joining OakNorth, I was a regulator for, 22 years, showing how old I am now. A variety of different roles across conduct and the prudential spheres. And my last role was heading up the new bank startup unit at the PRA, Bank of England.
That's great. And finally, Diana?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Diana Paredes, the CEO and co-founder of Suede. We're a RegTech company that has actually grown out of London and scaled globally, which has been very exciting. We fundamentally have created technology that allows us to turn regulation into code. We have been quite close to a lot of the evolutions globally around, what RegTech and I guess how the regulators are looking at the opportunities with new technologies to innovate on their side as well. Fundamentally, our technology allows us to, take a lot of data, normalize it, and then turn that into a regulatory output, which can be in the form of analytics, reports, or calculations.
Perfect, thank you. Welcome, everyone. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about the regulation landscape in the UK currently. Is it keeping up with innovation? Where do we stand? Nick, what's kind of your experience of that? Do you think it's, what's the current state of play, I suppose?
Yeah, look, the current state of play, well, let's take a step back. I think post the financial crisis, back at the end of the start of the last decade, the regulators actually did a real step change in the UK in terms of their approach to fintech and their approach to innovation and competition, both at the PRA where I used to work, but also probably more significantly at the Financial Conduct Authority as well. They initiated their project Innovate at the FCA, which encompasses a lot of things, but also encompasses, I'm sure you've all heard, the sandbox. So look, I think quite rightly, the regulators in the UK are seen as world leading in terms of their approach to fintechs and their approach to innovation. I guess the challenge is that a lot of people across the world, and I've interacted with a lot of them in lots of other jurisdictions, in my previous role, in my current role as well, the rest of the world is catching up, right? And it's catching up, it's either caught up or maybe even overtaken in a couple of places as well. So I think the focus and the priority for the regulators will be to keep that momentum up, to stay at the forefront from a UK perspective in terms of fintech, in terms of being open to innovation and open to new business models, and making regulation easy to access for new entrants as well, which I'm sure we'll get on in the not too distant future. So look, really, I would say summary, really good start from the regulators, the UK regulators, but look, they really need to keep on the front foot and keep this front and center of what they're thinking about. I think the other aspect for us as Oak North is that, look, a lot of work's been done to allow new entrants to come into the UK. What we believe is now really important is the scale-up stage, right? So for us, it's kind of, we call it season two at Oak North, where we've built the business and we're successful and profitable, and now we're scaling the business, and we want to work with regulators hand in hand to try to find ways of reducing barriers to growth so successful fintechs can scale effectively in the UK.
Sure. And Diana, what are your thoughts on where the UK is in terms of the rest of the world and how it's viewed?
Yeah, I would very much echo what Nick was just mentioning, in the sense that we are very much leaders when it comes to that. Wherever, whichever forum you discuss the innovation piece from a regulator's perspective, whether it is, from the Basel Committee or the European Commission or, the Singaporean regulator, or even different feds, it's very clear that the UK has very much been a leader and a pioneer in the space. I think that the positioning here is very positive. I would say that obviously what's happened as well in the past few years is that you have some regulators, in other jurisdictions that have become quite supportive of fintech and maybe have done a bit more from that perspective, which is why you want to, obviously, the UK to continue, remaining the leader by continuing to be proactive, because it's not a situation where you can rest on your laurels in this kind of context. But overall, the fact that a lot of the thinking around, having a very positive ecosystem led by the regulator for fintech and RegTech innovation started here. I think it's obviously something that we should be very proud of, and I think it reflects in the health of our ecosystem as a fintech community overall.
Sure. And Jeff, from your experience, what are some of the key challenges that fintechs are facing in the UK's regulatory environment?
Yeah, I think generally I'd echo the comments that have just been made by the panelists, and I think one of the things to add to that is the key challenges really are that not so much there is an environment, because there is, but more about, are the firms ready to be regulated? I think that's one of the things that I'm finding a lot of, is understanding that actually, you may have an innovative solution, you may have a technology platform that surpasses all others, but really looking at what the proposition means to the FCA from a regulatory perspective. So that talks a lot about sound and sustainable business methods and processes and people in particular. So yes, the FCA has a statutory operational objective to say we need to promote competition in the marketplace. And if you look at fintech from the perspective of, say, payments and e-commerce, you can see how that's happening. And the FCA are catching up with that. But certainly they're expecting firms to meet them some way in the middle there, with ensuring that they have a proposition that is ready to be regulated and ready to be an approved person.
Definitely. And Nick, do you kind of echo some of that from the experience of Oak North as a fintech? What are some of the challenges that you faced? What's gone right? What's maybe been more difficult?
Yeah, absolutely echo that. I mean, you've got to be ready to be regulated as well, right? So whilst all of the initiatives like the new bank startup unit, like the sandbox and other things are there to make it easier to get into the regulated space, once you're in, there is still absolutely very clear requirements, obviously depending on what your business model is and what risk that business model poses to the regulators' objectives. But you need to be ready to be regulated, and it's a different mindset in a way, right? I'm sure a lot of people on this call are entrepreneurs, are fantastic at setting up and growing businesses, but all of a sudden you're interacting with organizations that think differently and act differently, and you've just got to be ready to be able to interact with them. And as Jeff said, to make sure you're thinking about seeing the world through their eyes and what they see as being important. And those things that are important to the regulators should be absolutely important to you and your board and your executive and your staff. So, you know, it's about getting ready for being regulated. We've been at Oak North, it's actually our 5th anniversary this month. So, you know, we've been from a bank that has a balance sheet of 0 up to a bank that's lent £4.5 billion now in the UK. So, you know, and along the way, we've actually worked very closely with the regulators. Look, it is challenging. You know, they ask good, and they should ask good and challenging questions about your business model, your systems, your processes, and what you do. That's their role, because having good, effective regulation is good for the industry. But it's also about a two-way street as well, I think, particularly when working with the regulators as you grow, about explaining how your business model is changing and performing, and the controls and all those other things that you have in place, of building a really good working relationship with your supervisor and your regulator. And as Jeff said, really understanding what's on their areas of concern, what's important to them, and reacting to that as well.
I think that's a really important question to bring up, is what is important in terms of regulation and how fintechs can grow responsibly and serve their customers in the right way. Jeff, what are your thoughts on that, especially in the kind of, I suppose, payments and e-commerce space?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because, and as Nick alluded to, the FCA do think about this in a different way. This is not to say that this is purely a regulatory exercise, because there is certainly interest on their side around what the business model is. I mean, things to think about are certainly, is your business model something that needs to be regulated in the first place? Is an important thing. The second is it sustainable? So, is it sound enough as a business? But certainly things around how you're planning to go to market. You'll hear a lot about business plans. You'll hear a lot about programs of operations and things of that nature. This is where the FCA want to know more about how what you do meets with their risks as they see that. So as a good example, if you're talking about a customer experience, is it that the customer experience must be seamless, or is it that you need to make sure that you're dealing with anti-money laundering controls, for example, at the outset? So you've got to think about it from that side of things. So what I would say is, things to avoid would be to say, well, actually, our platform or our technology does anything that you want it to do, because that's the sort of question where the FCA will say, well, okay, how does that happen then? So it's about understanding that you would be rightly so proud of your platform, your proposition. Make sure it manages the risks. Does it safeguard clients' funds? Does it deal with financial crime? Have you got governance structures in place? When we talk about fintech firms being somewhere around 60% technology staff and everybody else is the rest, think about what that means. And I would say, if there's a way of looking at this, it would be, in the technology space, I'm sure everybody's come across the concept of technology debt, and then the idea of, you know, when you need to upgrade, when you have to go further with technology. Think about governance debt. That's what I would say. So actually, at the outset, you are describing something and you have systems and controls in place and people. But actually, as Nick alluded to, there's going to be a time when you're going to ramp up, and you're going to need to know how you're going to do that and keep pace with what the FCA expect you to do.
Definitely. Diana, from your perspective, how does that make the UK kind of a unique environment, I guess, with the work the regulators are doing and the relationship they have?
I think that if you're an innovator and you're trying to do something in this space, the recommendations from the regulations should be welcome, right? I think that the market in general that we have here, it very much promotes competition. I think anyone really has a fair shot at making it in this market relative to a lot of other countries, even in Europe. And I think that from that perspective, there needs to really be this very positive filter when you look at it from an innovator's perspective, that yes, it might be painful, but there's a good reason to it. One of the big regrets when you hear in regulatory circles around the Brexit and the UK leaving, the way that regulation has been done in the past few years across Europe is because the UK has always been one of the most reasonable players when it's come to actually making regulatory legislation for the whole of the EU bloc. And so I think that that's something that a lot of people are quite vocal about, saying how that will be missed as part of the Brexit process. So I think that the UK market and the reality that it's been so, pro-competition, pro-markets, and that it's known for being that, it should be understood that what the regulators are trying to get you to do, is usually for a good reason, and it's usually fair, and it's usually been going through a lot of analysis to make sure that things are fair for new entrants as well. So, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere because of that. And so I think that if you welcome that and you make yourself, responsible enough in terms of managing the risk and all of that kind of stuff that Jeff was mentioning, but at the same time, understand that this is almost like the minimum viable product in risk to actually take to any other decent market, you've got a winner, right? So welcoming those and really trying to tackle those well here is actually the best place to do it, because nothing that you will be asked to do is unreasonable. It's actually being filtered through a lot of years of trying to understand the sector, which is also why the regulator here has been more proactive than in other regions. So I think it's like as a fintech, to set up here with that understanding is actually a big plus, because it means that you will analyze your service through the right lens for a competitive environment and for something that doesn't pose a risk to consumers, which obviously should never be your intention.
Yeah, definitely agree. I hear from a lot of fintechs that this is a great place to start, I suppose, that journey, and then expand out into different markets too. Nick, from your point of view, what would you like to see kind of progress from the regulator? Is there any more barriers that can be kind of removed there?
Yeah, I think for us, it's around kind of, as I alluded to at the start, barriers now to focus on removing the barriers to growth. So, if we all agree that, they've done a great job on reducing barriers to entry and facilitating entry into the market, and whether that's, through directly, whether you're just FCA regulated, whether you're dual regulated, you're an insurer or a bank who wants to come in, by the PRA and the FCA. Great work being done. On the bank side, there's been 22 new banks since 2013, new UK banks that have opened up. Many names like ours that people on this call know. But for us now, it's about removing those barriers to growth. So, particularly on the banking side, making sure that there is proportionate regulation, that it's not just a one size fits all, that there's acknowledgement that different sizes of firms within a sector pose different risks to that sector by the regulators, and enabling the regulators then to have a more proportionate approach. In fact, to be fair to the regulators, it's clearly on their agenda and they're clearly thinking about this. I think for us, right, it's a question of, we've got a lot of successful fintech startups in the UK. We're a world leader in that space without any shadow of a doubt. What probably, let's be honest, we're not a world leader in is having a large, internationally competitive technology fintech that operates here in the UK that competes overseas. And to be fair, we haven't really got that, maybe one or two coming up the rails now in Europe, but it tends to be for tech firms and fintech firms, you look at the US or to China, in all honesty. And I guess for us, it's about what can we do and what can policymakers and regulators do in the UK and hopefully in Europe as well to remove some of those barriers to growth, so we can have the next Tencent or Alipay or whatever it is based in the UK or based in Europe. And that's for us is the key area of priority. Part of that is about making sure that we have proportional effective regulation for the growing and firms that are growing and scaling.
Sure. And I think another important thing to ask for the audience today is a few kind of pieces of advice you would recommend for fintechs and companies to think about in terms of regulation when they enter the UK market. Maybe Jeff, we'll start with you. Do you have any kind of tips?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what we said at the very beginning about being ready to be a regulated firm. I think that's extremely important. So having a sort of a sound business plan across the piece is one of the key things, and a program of operations that really does help the regulator understand what your business is. And I think that would help with the sort of the barriers to growth that I think Nick was talking about as well, because my experience has been that, you know, the FCA are genuinely interested in new firms coming in and what you're actually offering to provide. But don't forget the fact that they're looking at this from a slightly different lens. I would say that you could think about that in terms of saying, well, actually making sure you have a very clear picture of the strengths and the limitations of the things that you're doing. So what I said earlier about assuring the regulator that your systems or processes, your technology can do absolutely anything or everything that they ask for, because they instinctively won't believe that. It's much more about you understanding where those things are, the governance structure, making sure you have that dealt with. But most importantly, I think, is have a realistic timeline in mind for when you think you're going to be seeking approval and actually achieving it. Our experience has been that depending on the type of firm that you want to be as an authorised person, it could be, it's supposed to be anything between sort of 3 to 6 months, but it tends to be a lot longer than that. So if you have a go live in mind, think about that in terms of saying, well, you're going to have to factor in perhaps 9 months, maybe even longer, for an application process to navigate its way through the FCA's authorisations department.
Definitely. So it's about being realistic about what you need to get done and what the timelines are and that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yes.
Diana, what would be some advice from your perspective?
Effectively, so if you want to be regulated, obviously making sure that you try to take advantage of the sandbox and all of these things that the regulator here offers, which is quite exceptional. But I do think that, you know, if you're looking at fintech more broadly, there's a lot of opportunities to do business without being regulated as well. And so I think that you're trying to consider what avenues there are for that is also quite interesting. And the sandbox and actually the you know, Project Innovate can help to give you an idea as to whether you should be regulated or not. And so I think that part of going through that journey of the exercise of properly understanding your business model versus the regulation is to try to see if maybe there are some things that you can kickstart with your business that have nothing to do with being authorized. And there's a lot of business to be done in that space as well. I think I have had a lot of conversations with fintechs, you know, with peers and friends that don't necessarily understand regulation, because obviously we do RegTech, so we kind of do this in and out, and we understand very clear when you have to kind of become authorized versus not. But where, you know, at the, you know, even a year into their business, they didn't really quite capture or understood the implications of them being regulated as to if it was necessary or not. And so they wanted to kind of connect with the Project Innovate team or the sandbox to be able to figure these things out. And I think that there's actually a lot of pre-work and legwork that you can do before then, because not everyone needs to be regulated depending on your business. It varies quite a lot. So I think, you know, getting to grips around that, it might mean that you never need to even look at some of this, you know, that closely. So that's something I would also keep in mind.
So rather than feeling like you're sort of stuck in limbo if you're waiting to get things through, you can still do a lot in that time as well. That's really interesting. And Nick, what would be your kind of top piece of advice?
Yeah, look, I totally agree with the comments Dana and Jeff have made. I guess, look, from our experience of going through the authorization process and then growing, it's also for us, if you know, clearly if you do need to be regulated, you make that application, you know, do all your homework just as has been spoken about, but be prepared also to be able to clearly explain and articulate how you intend to grow your business and how you intend to ensure that the systems and controls and people grow in line with the growth of your business and the complexity of your business as well. The regulators will expect you to have thought that through, probably up to 5 years, probably, from the point where hopefully you get authorization that matches obviously your business plans, the sustainable and viable business plans that Jeff touched on before. So make sure that those systems and controls and people, all the things you need to do to tick the boxes from a regulatory perspective to run your business, are in place before your growth, and you could demonstrate that they will be in place before your growth. Because the last thing the regulator wants to hear is, yeah, we'll grow and then we'll hire. They want to see that you've hired or you've built the systems that you need or whatever it is before you actually start on that regulated activity, that journey. So that would be my advice. Once your application is in, think about the growth.
Definitely. So there's a few things to think about there, and I think as the same way as fintech has tried to make life easier for businesses and consumers in terms of finance, we also have now RegTech coming in that is trying to make that whole process easier for companies as well. Diana, obviously working with a RegTech, would you be able to tell us maybe a little bit about the growth of that and the growth of Suede and what you're seeing develop in that space?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that one of the things that we have noticed happening in the market is that, Project Innovate obviously started in 2014. It's been a few years. It was actually very much at the same time that we incorporated. So that's why we're very close to the project. And I think that the conversation between regulators and startups started to grow very much from that time, which is also why, with the EFC being one of the first regulators really doing something in that space, that's why they're also pioneering from that perspective. And then you saw that, we would have a lot of interactions with central banks around the world from the very beginning. And at the beginning, it was very much this kind of like fintech side project where some people would kind of get interested to kind of attend the meeting and discuss with some fintechs, and it was not a very coordinated effort. And then you see that in the past, like at least since the last 2 years, almost every regulator in the world, definitely from sophisticated economies, has now a fintech team or a RegTech team, depending on how sophisticated they are, but basically be part of the regulated body that actually looks directly at the impact of fintech, but also that looks at the technology that they could be using, whether it's cloud computing or other things. And that is something that we have witnessed firsthand. We've been very privileged to have a lot of access to regulators everywhere, and to basically be part of that conversation of basically having very random conversations with different central banks to then actually seeing a much more coordinated effort happening centrally as well. And this conversation around technology being so important, even as a regulator, becoming much more forefront in a lot of the things that people are taking up. So I think that this evolution of, like supervising the fintech to also trying to think about how to use that for your own benefit, is something that's definitely more recent, but very real, because I think that the same way that you have seen the financial industry adopt more fintech, take advantage of better technology and the benefits of that, because some of the rewards are coming in now, the regulator also realized, well, if we're analyzing all of this for the market, then why don't we look at how we can use some of this? And so there's been a bit of a movement, obviously, from RegTech being very much a sector that's servicing financial services, to SupTech, which is supervisory technology, that is basically the technology that can be used by the regulators. And there's been very interesting things happening in that space, from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation basically putting some money to look at projects that are specific for central banks. So there's a lot of things that have been happening in the past few years, literally in the last couple of years, where you're culminating to things where, for example, the Basel Committee is actually having innovation hubs that they're going to place around the world, including one of them being the UK. And that is actually very much something that we hadn't really seen before. They've been doing, for example, a tech sprint now with the G20, where the problematics were very much about things that they can leverage off as well. And I think that all of this is very positive. I think that the question that we still have to ask ourselves as an industry is, in the same way that the regulators start asking for more RegTech and more supervisory tech, how are they setting themselves up to actually work with innovators? Because obviously everyone knows that, for good reasons, obviously governments and public bodies have to work when they outsource things with, very established companies. And obviously very established companies are very, very often the opposite of innovation. And so there needs to be a way for regulators to really make peace with the competition agenda versus actually, giving tenders and finding a way to really work with, tech companies and innovators, rather than always working with the typical, I would say, the typical culprits that you find in the space, because if not, we're going to end up in a situation where the financial sector adopts better technology, but the regulators basically end up just doing the same thing they always do because they just don't know how to work with innovators. And so I think that's a bit the dilemma that the industry is facing now. As a regulator, how do you actually, work with innovators at the same time then trying to, keep the competition agenda, adopt new technologies without having to necessarily, upset anyone about it, because you have to, do something, and not you'll just take legacy systems and repackage them as modern, and really there wouldn't be any good into that.
So, yeah. And Jeff, what have you seen as the impact from RegTech? Are you starting to see that as an increasing I suppose, aid for people?
Yeah, definitely. I would certainly echo everything that Dana has just been saying. I think it's the support mechanisms are out there just to help with the fintech and the regtech sort of merge, if you like, so that we have a sort of many different avenues in which we can support regulation. And I think actually it is in driving this idea of a conversation about where technology and regulation meet, and actually this sort of like the cross-fertilization of experience in respect of the FCA, for example, in the UK versus the technology leaders, about where regulation can sit in that environment.
Definitely. And Nick, what kind of impact are you seeing? Have you engaged with RegTechs?
Yeah, no, absolutely we have. And, I think if you look at, take a step back, you look at, I'm not saying for us, but, I was fortunate enough to speak to one of the chairman of one of the the biggest US banks, and he told me they spend like $1 billion a year on compliance, right? So, there's clearly a market there for RegTech to come in, help take friction away. And for us, at Oak North, yes, we do. We work particularly in the AML KYC space, working with RegTech providers in that space, and it's been incredibly helpful to us to take out risk, right? To help us remove risk, but also to drive efficiencies as well, because just as we do on our technology platform for SME lending, we find that technology could do some fantastic things and help in some fantastic ways as well. So yeah, look, we do absolutely use RegTech, and I think the point made on SupTech is also very valid. It's going to be really interesting. And when I was at the PRA, we had just started to dip our toe into the water there of using SupTech to help with supervisory work as well. So I think what we're going to see is increasingly regulators being on the front foot in terms of using technology to ensure that their firms that they regulate and supervising are meeting requirements. So I think we can all expect, if we're engaging with regulators, to either have RegTech helping us or to be on the other end of SupTech as well. So, but look, we see it as a very good thing.
Of course, and we have kind of RegTech, and we've mentioned the FCA, but I want to kind of give the audience a bit of an overview of what is out there to help them. So when they're coming into the UK and they're thinking about all these aspects, Diana, what's kind of some of the most important organisations maybe to engage with, and what are some of the more useful things people can do?
Is this in terms of one of the questions that was asked, Olivia?
Someone has asked to do with that, and yeah, is there kind of a wider list, I guess, of people to engage with?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I guess that the when it comes to finding out whether you should be regulated or not, Project Innovate is probably the go-to place, whether it is their website. There's actually quite a lot of things that have become a bit more explainable in the handbook to understand that. And I would recommend anyone that's trying to figure out, first principles, whether they should be regulated or not, to go there. If you still have some doubts, there's obviously like an email address that you can kind of reach out to. The sooner you do that, as per Nick's point, the better, because then it means that you're in time for everything, because things can take time when it comes to maybe you do need to be regulated, and maybe it's going to take you some time to find out whether you should or not, as a fact, right? And so then that could have all sorts of consequences about funding, if you're trying to get money from investors or all of that kind of stuff. If you don't have that answer now, it can be problematic. And then, in terms of like other support, environments that are not government authorities. So you do have a lot of, RegTech groups, Fintech groups in the UK. London obviously has a very strong network fintech innovators. We bounce ideas from each other a lot. And I think that, you know, there, for example, you do have a lot of different people that try to understand when they first start their businesses how that would work. And so a lot of people with other experiences can actually share that on the chat, and we exchange a lot of that, you know, knowledge, I guess, from that perspective. So you have, you know, I guess like a combination of very, you know, government authority fees, which you can get from the regulator to give you a sense to whether you should be regulated or not. And then you can also leverage, I guess, from the network of people that we have here, people who have gone through the journey already. I know, for example, that a lot of like blockchain new businesses were trying to figure out whether they should be regulated or not for some time. And so they got a lot of the findings as well from sharing that with other peers that we had in like our group chats and the fintech chats that we have in the UK for that.
Sure. Jeff, who would you kind of recommend that people engage with when they come?
Well, I think that's right. I think Diana says is correct. I think certainly trying to find and get together with the right forums to draw on practical experiences is definitely one of the ways forward. Other places like incubator businesses that sort of perhaps get a group of people together and help firms perhaps develop in areas which they aren't quite there yet with. So perhaps they've got the technology side sorted. They need to think about all the other support functions that they need to consider and perhaps get support in that way. And you know, going back to the regulatory side, you know, the FCA does tend to tell people what's on their mind, and you do see a lot of communications from them about, you know, where we see the risks, the dreaded Dear CEO letters that people may have heard about before, where they send letters out saying this is what we're worried about. And there's guidance out there from them, and I think they're trying to get better at that, as Diana's alluded to, and so that you can then see and understand where their concerns are, and also then you can see from the other side, from the community, if you like, the practical experience of implementing those things.
Definitely. And Nick, who would you recommend that people engage with?
Yeah, look, totally agree with Diana and Jeff. I'd say definitely go to the regulators as well. They're very open. They've done a lot of work over the last few years of trying to simplify and demystify how you apply for whether you need to be regulated and how you apply. So, you know, both the FCA's Project Innovate, the FCA and the PRA's new bank startup unit, all are very helpful places where there's a lot of detailed information. I think also utilize the trade bodies as well. So Charlotte Croswell and her team do a fantastic job at Innovate Finance. They're always open to being able to provide advice and steer to new fintechs coming in. Also, the guys at Tech Nation as well are really, really good, really on the front foot too, as well as the guys at UK Finance, the trade body for banks in the UK. And also, look, use other things like the professional services firms, right? You don't always have to pay, but they will always try and help and answer your questions. They're always interested in trying to build a long-term relationship with fintechs. So look, leverage the advice and the steer and the free resources that they provide. All the big professional services firms are very focused and produce a lot of really good and detailed information to help you, all free, all available on their website, or, you know, even contact emails. They'll be very happy to have a telephone conversation or a meeting when we can all meet again at some point in the future. But yeah, all of those resources, definitely. There's a lot of free stuff that's available. You don't have to spend a fortune. There's a lot of free stuff that's available out there. And use your network as well. You know, build a network of, you know, just as Diana was saying, you know, Jeff was saying, there's networks of people who are all in the same spot as you, can offer advice, maybe a few steps ahead of you about what to do. So really think about that too.
Yeah, that's certainly something I would echo. I mentioned it on a panel yesterday. You know, just generally fintech in the UK, there's so many different networks you can get involved with, and there's so many people you can ask questions, and everyone's quite open. I think the attitude is quite good towards that. So that's really helpful. I think we have lost Jeff, but I'm sure he'll be back for the Q&A sessions. We have had an audience question I wanted to ask you both. Do you think there are opportunities for RegTechs to work with the FCA in many of the kind of RegTech and SupTech initiatives they're driving? What's the current relationship there, Diana?
I mean, I would say it's actually still quite difficult to have very positive results. I would say that the reality when it comes to working with the regulator as a tech company, and the feedback so far, and I know that they're taking it in, is that if you're a young company that's, you know, very dynamic, agile, has good technology, it's almost, because of the approach of the setup of how this is done, it almost feels like you're giving up a lot of IP for very little in return, which is obviously not ideal. To go through the more formal process of working with the regulator, you usually would have to partner, I think, with some of the large consulting firms to make that happen. And even then, it's not clear how much credit they would want to give to a new tech company versus a large incumbent. And so I think that whilst they're interested to listen, which is definitely very positive, you don't get a lot from it, right? And so I think that the complaint in general has been, well, as an innovator, you have so much stuff to do. You know, it's a choice that we've had to make as well, because we have so much work to do with clients. If you start spending it with regulators that doesn't really have, you know, budget, and where it's not very clear what you get out of it, or if you don't get really very much credit for it, then what's really the point of it? And this is what I was mentioning before, where the way that, you know, public bodies are used to interacting with vendors, or are used to interacting with technology companies for their own benefit, is usually done and given to tenders that are very closed and that are always to the same usual suspects. And so that means that it's not very much open. It's not like, you know, the innovation teams at a bank that want to actually go and find the innovators and try to work with them and bring them into the company. So I think that the balance of trying to strike that correctly, and for the way for tenders and real outsourcing to happen with younger companies, needs to be done. It needs to really be looked at, because if not, we're just going to end up with you know, the same old stuff repackaged on the regulator stuff, versus that, you know, the financial industry getting a lot of brand new toys that then the regulators don't know how to supervise, right? And that's really the problem into this. So I would say that the opportunities are there, but I'd be very wary about how much time you invest as an innovator, because the consequences of it are not necessarily going to have a huge impact in your work. And nobody really cares if you work with the regulator or not. So you can help and give opinions, but I think you want to be very careful about how much time you're spending into that, versus the, you know, return on investment of your time, versus targeting clients, versus actually making money. I mean, regulators are notoriously the worst customers. They don't have budget, and they want very specific projects that will be very particular to them, and that are not scalable, right? So as a tech company, I think you have to be really careful about that. And I mean, we give our opinion to the regulators a lot about how they need to change their own processes if they really want to have a dynamic interaction with tech companies and innovators, and not the usual suspects that they usually get advice from. Because you will find that Google or Amazon or companies like ours don't necessarily want to spend the time, because we don't really see the benefits of it sometimes. It's just, you know, giving away IP and giving away information for not much reward from that perspective.
Definitely. So I think there's definitely a way to go in terms of leveraging these kind of tech solutions, but also we're not quite there yet, but there's lots of opportunities. I think I suppose some of the main pieces of advice to take from this panel would be just to be aware of the environment before you go in, and as has been a kind of theme throughout this week, you know, make sure you know what you're getting yourself into, you know the timelines, and you kind of engage with all the right networks, which you will find I think will be really helpful. So in a few minutes we'll be able to join the speakers in their kind of meeting room, so you can ask them questions yourself if there's anything you think that I have missed, or if you have any more specific questions to ask. Just as a reminder, big thank you to Nick Lee, Head of Regulatory Affairs at Oak North, Jeff Dadswell, CEO of TH Risk Solutions, and Diana Paredes, CEO of Suede. And yeah, I think maybe you've got time to get up and have a quick cup of tea before you all settle in to ask your questions.
Thanks, Olivia, and thanks to the panel. Yeah, certainly a lot of things that you know, I've learned from today's session. You know, you think you know everything, and suddenly you hear about more stuff that you hadn't even heard of. So thank you very much for those insightful comments. And as Olivia said, you got to go and meet the speakers. And the reason why I say that is because I was in a room in the last panel, and the conversation that went on was fascinating. So sometimes you can just join relevant to you as well. So definitely worth doing. So I will say goodbye to most of you now. Obviously tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, we're kicking off with the setting up in the UK as some smart lawyer, accountant, recruiter, HR. That's going to make a difference to your plans for sure. So meet the speakers, and of course the Newfound team will be online from 10:45 to 11 o'clock if there's anything specific you want to ask us. So thank you, and meet the speakers.